And I think it should be live.
I see a little live button. That's a good sign.
Yeah, it's just yes. Yep. So we are live, and hello everyone, and welcome to this stream, this innovative stream where we'll be talking all about innovation that has happened across Brancher and that is happening at SUSE. So this will be a very interesting stream, and I'm very excited today to have Shannon with me. There is a story when I met Shannon back in India a couple of years back, and I was really inspired by his demos that he was showcasing for Rancher, and that was the time I was highly impressed by the product and by the team. So because I met Shannon, I have seen his enthusiasm, I have seen the way he speaks, the way he portrays things, and the vision that he was having at that time. So that was really inspiring, and from then I have been a big fan of him, a big fan of Rancher, and I have tried. I almost worked with a lot of people at Rancher. I have worked almost on all the products that Rancher have built over the period of time, whether it's K3S, K3D, K3C, Rancher itself, Rio. Almost all the Longhorn. So and even Harvester, which is now which was launched. So I'm playing around it, and we have a stream in Feb with Sheng. So I have been around rancher space. So this stream is very, very much close to my heart, I would say, because it's my favorite person and talking about one of my favorite companies. So that would be pretty interesting. So welcome, Shannon. Shannon is co-founder of Rancher, you all know, and now, right as of now, he's a COO of at SUSE. So Shannon, welcome, and would you want to introduce more something about yourself?
No, man, Simon, you did a great job. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me, and thanks for arranging the live stream. It should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to talking and catching up.
Yeah.
It
So
looks like I'm drinking a beer. I have it's actually just tea, but I was telling Ryan before we started. Everything at SUSE is in Europe, or a lot of the things. So I'm constantly doing like meetings at 5:30, 6 a.m. So I've needed more tea in the morning, and so I've
uh,
graduated from drinking tea from my normal coffee cup to now I'm drinking it out of like beer steins. That's how you know things are busy.
5:30 is painful.
It is painful. Yeah, you're right. There's a couple that are like 4 a.m. meetings where you're just like, oh my goodness,
Oh,
there's got to be another time we can do this. But it's really hard because you have the whole world trying to work together on things, and somebody's got to be inconvenienced. It's like it's either someone's dinner time, it's midnight, it's 4, and so trying to find the balance and finding time sometimes. And I don't mind waking up early, so it's not that I'm complaining.
how you manage taking the breaks? So how much breaks you manage? Like if you have back-to-back meetings, how do you manage the breaks?
Well, right now it's pretty cool because I've got a couple of things going for me. I've got 3 boys who are in school. So I have a 7-year old, a 11-year old, and a 15-year old. And so I've got them at the house, and so my breaks tend to be, kind of quick ins. But I get them to kind of entertain me because they're all doing homeschooling or at least some of the days they're school from home. And so I just try to like the one nice thing about a bigger company is there's a lot of meetings, but there's also a reasonably large number of meetings that get canceled. And so it's funny. Like I have my day starts out looking like it's going to be completely full, and then at least 1 or 2 will end up getting canceled, and I'll end up being able to run out, grab make a sandwich or say hi to my kids and make a new cup of tea and come back and get back at it, catch up on email and things like that. So I don't know. It's not too bad. It's funny. I mean, I'm somebody who's traveled my whole career. From my very first job out of college, I was on planes, almost immediately. And so this is the only year where I probably haven't flown 100,000 miles, at least since 2008 when we started cloud.com. Sheng and I started cloud.com. So it's been a lot of, it's been a big change. And I think I really enjoyed the first the first year of COVID. I really enjoyed the first year of COVID, but right now I'm starting to get a little stir crazy, where I'm definitely ready for an excuse to go to a conference, to get to KubeCon, to go to just to go back like where we met, and getting back to India and just getting to engage and talk about this technology with people actually using it in person is I certainly enjoy that because it's so much more, like you said, the enthusiasm gets a lot higher, the energy is a lot higher, you start to feed off each other's energy and the excitement
Yes.
goes up, and you come home just all incredibly jazzed to go work on things. So
Yeah, we are
yeah.
just waiting to meet. Talking about the early days, let's talk about the history of Rancher, the origin, the idea, and how basically you, when maybe you sat with Sheng, or how you came up with this idea, and what were the initial plans, and from there how it flown towards the product Rancher. So, can you tell a bit about the history of Rancher?
Yeah, sure. The history of Rancher really starts if you go all the way back to cloud.com, our previous company, because when Sheng really had this idea back in 2008 that that while the cloud computing, I mean, Amazon was only about 2 years old at this time, it was like 2006. So this idea of infrastructure as service and sort of API driven compute, where you could kind of dial up whatever you needed through an API and get it, was was really clearly the future. Kind of we're all excited about it at the same time, and Chang had the idea that wouldn't it be amazing to build that technology as software, and so we started working on cloud.com and cloud stack, our first project, our first open source project back then in 2008. And it was that little company that kind of started the whole journey, and everything we've done, kind of focusing on open source, getting in front of a lot of users and customers who could fund it and pay for things, and selling them on the value proposition, telling them, showing them what it could do. So we started a lot of the journey then. In fact, I would say in a lot of ways our Rancher kind of it really came out of that, because Will Chan, who was one of our other co-founders, and was also an early employee there, and really kind of one of the core founders of cloud.com. So the three of us kind of connected there, and then we met Darren, who was our customer. So Darren was actually the chief architect at GoDaddy, the internet kind of domain registrar. And so we got to know Darren as a customer, and he was a pain in the ass. And so we had this like pain in the ass customer who was constantly, finding every problem in everything we built. And and over time, we just kind of, that company just got rolling. We did a really good job of building something people could use. And I think that was sort of the kind of like, if you really get to the core of what is Rancher, I mean, this idea of software that manages infrastructure, is easy to use, kind of puts everything in front of people's hands so that they can quickly wrap their brain around the complexity of all of this. A lot of ways, that's really what Rancher is. And so we started on that journey. We built it up in the over about 3-4 years before that company was acquired by Citrix, and we spent then 3 years at Citrix working on that technology, and getting involved in OpenStack when that kind of emerged. Getting involved in a lot of hybrid cloud type deployments. And in fact, it was that on some of those projects, as we worked with companies trying to build clouds on premise, that we started to see the potential of or the need for a common layer of software management, right? Something that would work consistently between public cloud providers and on-premise infrastructure, and vSphere and CloudStack and OpenStack and whatever that was. So as we played around with that, I'll never forget, there was a meeting we had with one of the large banks, and we were talking about really kind of diving into this idea of using containers. And this was kind of pre-Docker even. We were talking about, what if a container could be instantiated in both places, and we could start to do things like overlay networking between containers. And so we started looking at that, but it was all really new, right? I mean, we had things like Solaris zones that had existed for a while, but we really hadn't, there was no easy thing. And then, sometime in 2013, Docker pops up, and, Darren by then is working with us. He joined Citrix, and, Darren gets really excited, starts talking. He goes and presents at the first DockerCon, kind of about just using containers and some of the stuff he'd been playing around with, working on some open source projects in the early days of Docker. And then in 2014, Shen and I were like, I'm pretty convinced that there's another level of this, that we, there's going to be a big opportunity to build something that will tie together computing, right? Tie together the cloud and on premise, and we were all pretty bullish on containers and the potential for them, and we decided we wanted to build a company around unlocking that potential. And, in the beginning, we didn't really know what that was going to mean. We knew we had a lot of history around orchestration, a lot of experience managing storage and networking, and, kind of delivering software orchestration platforms. Between the four of us, that was something we'd spent 6 years doing. So we had made a strong affinity for the role of management and orchestration and policy and users and multi-tenancy and sort of concepts like that. And, in the early days, it was really obvious that there was going to be a need for orchestration on containers, right? I mean, we weren't the only people thinking that. You had Docker Swarm kind of emerged, Kubernetes emerged, Mesos was already kind of doing this. They kind of pivoted their business to manage containers. So you had a lot of different approaches that began. And I think where we our Rancher 1.0, what we kind of landed on was, you know, start simple, build something easy to use, focus on, making this more manageable for people. And that very first version of Rancher had some of the concepts that kind of went on to make us successful. Things like, multi-environment management, right? Being able to spin up multiple clusters and isolate kind of management of them into different teams and different people. Concepts like overlay networking and, network policy management, things like user management, identity management. We're all in that very first thing. We did a lot more, right? We were working on, at the time, we were working on Cattle, which was our own orchestration piece. Like we were trying to solve, what would it look like to do orchestration of containers in a very, it's funny because Cattle really came out only because we could never get Swarm to work. We tried and tried and tried. We just couldn't get Swarm to work. And Darren really loved Docker Compose and the ease of use of Docker Compose. Like we're like, gosh, Kubernetes is felt really complex and felt really like massive at the time. And so, it had this feeling like something that might be over engineered and might be a little more complex than would appeal to the broad market. And it was also still really early and not GA, kind of pre knowing where it was going to go. And so we started working on Fleet, or not Fleet. We started working on Cattle, and Cattle was the sort of earliest version of orchestration in Rancher 1.0. And so by 2015, I think it was at AWS reInvent 2015. So we started the company in 2014, maybe it had been 2014. We had an early prototype that we went to reInvent and we just showed people, and it was incredible. It was like all of a sudden, we just were showing people this idea. And in fact, at the time, we were running cross cloud clusters. So we were building clusters out of resources in AWS, in DigitalOcean, and in a data center in Fremont running vSphere. And we would show like, look, you can spin up just basic VMs everywhere and build a cluster out of them, or do overlay networking, deploy workloads. And if you could do that, imagine what you could do, right? It was sort of like, that's a super hard engineering task. And, dealing with latency and all the other issues around that. And it just kind of, people were just really excited. I mean, we were packed, and we had just, I remember, kind of like we couldn't talk to all the people who wanted to talk to us. It was just like 10 people deep, people pushing in to try and figure out what. So you had this kind of, you came away totally fired up. And for me, it's always been those conferences, those chances to interact personally with people that where you get the enthusiasm to go back and kind of take the next big step, especially on an open source project. Because what we would see is we'd go to something like that, and then the number of downloads would explode, and word of mouth would start to kick in, and suddenly you've got 1,000 people or 5,000 people trying it, using it, running into problems, filing issues, talking about it on Twitter, telling you what's great, telling you what sucks, all of the truth kind of pours out. And so you end up with this moment where you can really look at what you built and understand where it's going to go. And it just kind of rolled from there. We ended up, kind of, seeing as the market developed, or, I don't think we ever really wanted to build orchestration. So as Kubernetes got better, we started to see the potential to standardize on Kubernetes. But we played with all of it. We spent a lot of time on Mesos and Swarm, Cattle, and, across the board. I mean, what we ended up really believing was that Kubernetes had, the best potential to be stable and scale. I mean, that was really the end of the day. The most important thing for orchestration was its stability. It had a great community behind it. It had, the support of Google, obviously, and but also Red Hat, and a lot of the commercial vendors were kind of leaning in that direction. So you had this potential for standardization. And for us, that was the most important thing. It was like anything, if Swarm had become the standard, then we probably would have just, really dug in and found a way to make Swarm really successful. But once Kubernetes started to get enough market share, we were one of the first people to kind of, I would say, jump all in. Especially because we'd come from this we were in this, pretty, I think if you look back at like Rancher 1.6, we were supporting Swarm and Kubernetes and Mesos, and we had customers using, like some customers were like, well, I have this team over here and they want to use Kubernetes. I've got this other team that loves Docker Swarm, and so they wanted this different orchestrator solution, and but we just didn't think it was tenable to keep working on multiple ones. So we started in probably 2016. We started working on 2.0, which became sort of Rancher today, and you made a pretty tough decision to kill our own orchestrator Cattle, which was probably the most popular orchestrator inside of Rancher, as well as all of the other orchestrators, and just completely focus on Kubernetes. I remember when we made that announcement, it was we got a lot of heat from some of the other especially from Docker and people there that we were pretty good friends with, for leaving the Swarm ecosystem, sort of saying we weren't going to support Swarm anymore. But it was just, there just wasn't, we just didn't see, we saw the market standardizing, and that was a really important moment. And it allowed us to do the stuff we were good at anyways. Like we wanted to be able to work on all of everything around the orchestrator. In addition to, kind of working on that core technology, we wanted to be able to start solving the real problems people have, right? How to manage at scale, how to put this stuff everywhere, how to get into the edge, how to deal with security, how to deal with apps and stuff. So that really kind of, we were doing really well before that, to be fair. For a startup, we were, we'd raised money, we were kind of growing very quickly. So even, I would say we were kind of one step ahead of where we saw potential risk. So, we felt like if we didn't move to Kubernetes, there might be a risk in the future if the market all moved there and we were not there. But we didn't really make the decision for that reason, because we kind of jumped off of a lot of these things before they ever slowed down. So in a lot of ways, we kind of took the whole community that was using Cattle with us to Kubernetes. There were a few people who just hated Kubernetes and were just, no, we're going to leave. But I would say about 75-80% of our community moved over to Kubernetes when we sort of helped them make that move. Which was painful. The move from 1.0 to 2.0 was probably the hardest, thing as a vendor, was to kind of like work people through, moving from, something that they liked, right? They'd chosen, they'd bought, they sort of believed in, maybe Cattle. In fact, most of them were Cattle. They really loved Cattle. Even today, I find people who come up to me at conferences and bemoan the death of Cattle and how much they loved it. But, it was the right decision, and it helped us really build a product that had a broad appeal, which if you're building an open source business, you really, and you want to be successful, you've got to find a market that you can grow in. You can give product to lots of people. So that's kind of how things went. And from there, it just took off like a rocket ship once we kind of found the key. And, as always, we gave it all away, made it all open source. And that, provided the energy in the market for Rancher to just spread and to kind of show up in places. I always think we're like, Rancher's like grains of sand. It just flies out every time someone uses it, someone else finds out about it, and they start trying it and realize it's open source, easy to use, great way to manage all the stuff they're working on. So it's been a great journey. I feel like we're just getting started, but it's been 6 years, 6, 7. It'll be 7 years this fall. So yeah, 6.5 years or so since we started the company.
Yeah, I have never felt that Rancher was, not stable at any point of time. You said that this very correct, that you were always one step ahead in thinking what would be the right direction to go. Because when I used Rancher, 3 years back, then also it was stable at the offerings that it provided. And when you say it now also it is again stable with another set of offerings, another set of features on top of it. So it has always been a stable product, that has helped the community, and that has helped the users, managing the clusters, whether you were providing these services for Swarm, Mesos, and Kubernetes, or now whether you're providing the service for Kubernetes alone with all the other cloud vendors integrations. So it was pretty stable then, and yes, of course it is pretty stable now. So that's what really I think I liked about Rancher, that the stability was always there and it was meant for use in production. Almost all the tools in Rancher are built at such a scale. You take K3s, it was not built with the intention to be used only for the development environment. So it was built for production. That's what it is portrayed, and that's what it is. And things like that makes it very interesting. And so I want to ask about Rio. So why? I mean, there was a lot of focus done by Rancher on Rio on in its initial days, if I'm not wrong. Then it is still there hanging around. So what is the future, or is it getting completely eliminated, or what is that about Rio?
Yeah, you know, one of the things about doing a company in open source is that you have the ability and the benefit to kind of you have a low barrier to entry to start working on projects and technology. And so we work on lots of things, and a lot of projects make it kind of to um, to kind of beta stage, and we get them sort of, we build it, we think about it, we sort of get it out, and we start to get feedback. And what we're always looking for when we do that is what will what will really solve a problem, right? Like what problem is urgent that people are trying to solve, and are where what's the urgent need in the market. And Rio's kind of really funny because in a lot of ways Rio, for those of you who don't know, Rio is a lightweight PaaS. It's meant to be sort of kind of a very easy way to kind of pick up uh, Kubernetes environments and use them to deploy applications and simplify that deployment. So kind of geared more to the application operator owner person that's responsible for the SME that's responsible for running apps on Kubernetes. And Rio really came out of, in a lot of ways, I think Darren's frustration with having to give up Docker Compose and the ease of using Compose, and the ability to kind of just create something really simple and easy to understand that you could easily pass around, and anyone could read and understand how an application needed to work. And so, he worked on Rio for a while. It was kind of his pet project, and every time I'd talk to him, he would be enthusiastic about it, and he'd be working on it. And at the time, Rancher was just exploding, so we were just really busy. The rest of the company very busy, kind of on this, explosive growth around Rancher. And so, as it got closer and closer to kind of a stage where we could demo it and show it to people, we got some really good feedback on Rio. People started looking at it, and we gave it some private demos to a few customers and users and community members, and we kept getting really good feedback on it. So we took it out. But one of the interesting thing about Rio is, out of Rio came K3s. So as Darren was trying to figure out how to do Rio, he wanted to build a really lightweight Kubernetes that could power Rio. And so if you look back at the timeline, basically, um, you know, initially K3s was just meant to be like an engine for Rio, and it was going to be this thing that was maybe even bundled inside of Rio. And and as we talked about it, I think it was Shen or somebody's like, maybe Darren or Shen, was said, like, the K3s thing is actually really valuable. I think that there's a lot of need for something like this, like a really sane, easy to consume distribution of Kubernetes that can boot and be managed, and isn't too fat, and has a lot of sensible defaults, and just makes Kubernetes easier for a lot of people to boot to. And so Darren kind of split the two things. He said, okay, we'll do Rio and K3s. Rio was kind of his passion project. K3s at the time was just sort of like, okay, a necessary component to deliver this Rio thing. And so when we rolled these two things out, we rolled out Rio and K3s around the same time. They both kind of came out I think it was the summer or spring of 2018. Maybe been 2019, 2018 probably. Anyways, I'm getting old. The years all run together. The reality was K3s like exploded. Like, K3s just became this like supernova that everyone was using, and it was getting consumed in so many different ways. It was getting, I mean, just it became more popular than Rancher, right? It became this thing that we just saw, and even to this day, like the adoption of K3s was just like, it really did fill a very important hole in the ecosystem. And while K3s exploded, Rio had sort of growth, like people were using it, but Darren got pretty just sucked into working on K3s because there were so many people using it. There were so many things it needed, and work that needed to go into it, that Rio kind of languished. Like, it just didn't have the bandwidth and resources. And Rio really was one of these things too, where it was very architect driven, right? Rio is an opinionated approach to doing deployments. It's the value of it is the opinion, right? It's kind of Darren's approach. And so, I think where we ended up with was K3S just kind of consumed all of the oxygen, and there wasn't really a lot of room to put into Rio, either from a marketing or from a development perspective. And so we never took it out of beta. We just didn't have the time or the resources to take it to the next step. So it's kind of lingered there. And interestingly enough, we haven't stopped getting requests about it. Like people still, there's a lot of people who play with it, are interested in it. There's a lot of good open projects out there like OpenFAS that already provide this sort of opinionated PaaS like layer around Kubernetes. So it's not like the market is desperate for something like this. It needs to be really compelling. Like for Rio to really take off, or for any project in that space to take off, it's got to sort of strike the right chord of usability and ease of use and sort of integrated capabilities. And we just never felt like we got there with Rio. Like I think internally we never felt like we crossed the bar where we felt like we were onto something that was clearly the right implementation of a PaaS. And that's kind of, we talked to lots of people. There were a lot of people who used it. We got a lot of feedback, and so where we've left Rio is kind of in this, I think, it's stuck in beta, really. It's stuck in a position where it needs more work to get to GA, and that more work needs to come, or it never will, right? It either never will get to GA, it'll be stuck in beta, or it needs more insight, or it needs more energy. And unfortunately, the hardest part of us is there's always new projects that are exciting and interesting that drive, maybe show more promise. And that's, I think, the truth of open source. I think of open source as like the state of nature. It's like a jungle of competing ideas that, and even inside of Rancher, it's a jungle of competing ideas. I mean, there's a couple times where Longhorn I would have had the same conversation about Longhorn where it looked dead. Like it looked like, we worked on Longhorn for 4 years before it was really ready for GA. 4.5 maybe. I mean, one of the earliest projects we started, and we talked about it. You can go back and you can hear Shanghai talking about Longhorn back in 2015. About block storage, some of the stuff we want to do, and it just wasn't there. It was clearly not ready, right? It wasn't stable enough. It wasn't featureful enough. It wasn't impactful enough. It didn't hit a right spot in the market. But in open source, you just keep going, right? Like in some cases, you just keep going. And so Longhorn, we had, we kind of brought in a new lead on it. When Shen Yang took over the project, it was kind of stalled. And then you have, great engineer, builds a great team around it, starts to work really hard at it. He really kind of tackles some tough engineering problems or limitations, and begins to then develop, get you towards a GA. Because that's the hard part, right? The idea isn't the hard part. Building it is even not always the hard part. At least building up a basic demo. It's really getting it to be something that someone will trust. And we had to, and again, for Darren, it was like he had to do that for K3S. He couldn't do that for both K3S and Rio at the same time. K3S was a massive undertaking, and in a lot of ways that I think K3S's success really made it very difficult for Rio to also be successful in the way that they both were birthed at the same time. So Rio kind of has, I would say, lingers on, and Darren's passion project that he really wants to get back to and wants to sort of take another hack at some point. But for now, it's, I think it's definitely not something I would say is going to go to GA anytime in the next few months or anything. We're still, it's ways off before it'll get there. But I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of faith in this work, right? I just found that, in open source, if there's a hole and there's a need, someone will build something there. And we're not super afraid at Rancher of that being someone else. I think our general approach is, if it's not us, someone else will build something great. And that will further the goal and further the mission. And we'll incorporate that into Rancher, and Rio will die. And the same is true of everything. It's like, if any one of the things we build isn't as good, like cattle, like at the end of the day, we killed cattle because we thought Kubernetes was better. And if we find that the market need for a really good open source, easy to use PaaS is filled, we'll just take that.
No, I think K3S is really one of my favorite projects. And those of you who don't know who are watching, so I work at Sivo, and we have a managed K3S service. So we have built a managed K3S solution out of K3S. So you can just see the the power that K3S brings in. And there is also a talk by Darren, I think a couple of weeks back he did at a CEO's community meetup, which talks really detailed internals about K3S, how they manage the patches, how they manage everything inside K3S, and how it works internally. So I think if you're interested, you can watch that. But yeah, that is, I mean, K3S is one of those projects in Rancher that has grown at a rate which no other project has grown. I have seen, it has grown exponentially, and it has become now one of the, not the de facto one, but for me, it's the de facto one when I choose whether I want to run my any sort of workloads, whether it's Raspberry Pis, my home lab, or my dev environment or prods, anything. I think K3S is sufficient enough to work at any devices. And the major use case K3S at edge is something that makes it more special and more useful for the people who are running it at edge. And people have built toolings around it, like the managed K3S is also there. So you can see the growth and success rate of K3S. So Shannon, now that we have reached to the point where Rancher is successful, everything is going good. K3S is one of the sandbox project in CNCF. Everything is running fine. Now, what was the journey towards SUSE? So, what was this acquisition whole about? How this came into picture?
Yeah, it's funny, Sam. The we've known the team at SUSE for a long time. Going back to the CNCF founding. SUSE has been a part of the CNCF. I known Thomas DiGiacomo, the CIO over there, for a long time, and or CTO, and so we had a lot of natural affinity for the team at SUSE. But we were working with Canonical, we were working with a lot of members of the community that were embedding Rancher, and we're kind of using Rancher or taking parts of it. And so we got to know the team at SUSE. They were a competitor, right? They had their own products that they were kind of building, and were planning to kind of roll out that were focused on Kubernetes management, container management. They were doing some really cool stuff actually around Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes that was kind of pushing the market. So we knew of them, they knew of us really well. And I think, like most of these acquisitions, I think the idea struck them that they could accelerate their business a lot by acquiring someone like Rancher. And so I think they went out, talked to the market. But it was pretty clear from the first time they reached out to us that they were just big fans. They just liked what we were doing. They liked, I mean, they're an open source company. We're an open source company. We have a lot of overlapping customers. Like, a lot of Rancher customers were using SUSE. We both, in a lot of ways, our main competitor was Red Hat, right? They were competing with Red Hat on Linux. We were competing with Red Hat on OpenShift. So we had this sort of natural, the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of relationship, where it was easy to partner and easy to talk. And to be fair, we didn't really have any plans to sell the company. We were just growing and really happy. We just raised money, so we had a ton of money in the bank. But SUSE really, I think they just decided they really, really liked what we were building, and they loved our story. They liked the fit. I also think that the market was kind of, the number of companies that looked like Rancher all of a sudden disappeared, right? You had some other acquisitions that had happened kind of earlier in the cycle, and suddenly we were in a position where we're this little, 150, we were probably 250 by the time the acquisition happened, but we're this little company with an outsized market share because everyone was using Rancher, and tons of, 30,000 users, right? Like, tons and tons of people using it. We kind of got into about 400 or 500 customers, a lot of really big customers. So our revenue was growing really well. And it was, I think, for in a lot of ways, it was just the timing was right. They saw what we were doing, they valued it a lot, and that was important, right? At the end of the day, these acquisitions only happen when they value you, close to how you value you, right? You have to kind of align on the value of something, and they really, they really valued us. They loved us. They loved the product. They liked what we're doing. They loved our team. They loved our community. They kind of believed in the same things we believed in about how open source, can be both a huge change agent in technology, but also a good business model. And so, we aligned, and that was really the story. And they, once they, kind of set their eyes on it, they really kind of continued to pursue us for almost a year, really kind of just dead straight running, trying, kind of trying to convince us to make the decision to sell the company to them. And so eventually we got convinced, right? Like, so I would say they were pretty convinced early on about the fit, and we weren't as convinced at the beginning. We felt like we were kind of, we didn't know SUSE well enough to know that how good the fit was going to be. And then, as time went on, we got to know, the team there better and better, and understand what they were doing. It became a fit. A big part of it was their independence, right? SUSE hadn't been independent, for 20 years, right? SUSE was this great, kind of independent software company in Germany that sort of blew up in the late 90s, which is kind of how most people, or many people around the world, were introduced to Linux. And then they get bought by Novell, and they go through, I mean, really 15 years of being part of Novell and Attachmate, and just, they're kind of a small part in a big portfolio of companies, none of which were hyper growth companies. They were all kind of solid, to mid-sized growth companies. Novell, was obviously hugely impacted by other things. And so, SUSE really, I would say, kind of languished inside of Micro Focus, and inside of Novell, as it just was. It was like, it languished in the sense of energy and focus and resources, but actually as a product group, it just kept growing. Like, they kept seeing people pick their projects, and they continued to gain market share, and really become the dominant Linux provider in Europe, and kind of number two in the world behind Red Hat. And so they were steadily growing without necessarily having the independent, like, they couldn't buy companies, they couldn't do the kind of things that Red Hat was doing to kind of grow their footprint. um, and so they had to build everything organically inside of these larger companies. So when they got spun out and they get bought by private equity, they all of a sudden, have a CEO, right? A real CEO who has the independence to start to drive things. And, they begin to empower their employees. They begin to change the culture from a culture of, kind of cost management and profit maximization to a culture of innovation. They, they became more and more appealing to us, right? We're like, wow, they have a lot of strength, a huge customer base. They're independent. They understand open source. And we really were we just felt like it was a great fit. And so by the end, I was sold, certainly. I felt like it was a great fit for us. It was the right kind of company. It was the one company I looked at. I mean, we had multiple companies pursuing Rancher. So all of a sudden we were in a position where there were 4 or 5 companies, really kind of interested in buying us and really wanting to incorporate us into their portfolios. And when I looked at all those companies, it felt like SUSE was the only one that had this open source DNA that we had, and that where I felt like we would be able to keep doing the things that made us successful. It's like, in some cases we might have been able to make a lot of money by selling the company, but we would have probably killed the community. We would have killed the products. We would have, they would have gone, if we'd end up in the wrong situation, somebody would have tried to take and make everything we do proprietary, and, try and take away the things that allowed us to get to where we were. And that wasn't an issue with SUSE. They got it right. They made it very clear that that's how they wanted to grow the company. So it was for me, it was the right place. And I remain very convinced of that now that I've been here for 3 months or so, in my new role, and really connecting to the team here. It's just a team full of passionate people. They get open source. Still, I would say, we're still learning to run, though. It's not like we've totally, they're only a year and a half really exited from being part of a larger company. We're still learning to run. So we've got this, I sort of feel like we look like a teenager running. It's a little gangly, and we're kind of figuring things out. But man, when it hits its stride in the next 6 months, I think it's going to explode. I think there's just so much innovation, so many really good assets, many of which are not fully developed and need a little bit of attention. And a big part of the fit for me was Shen leading engineering, right? Having Shen drive engineering and innovation meant that we were going to bring the ethos that allowed us to create projects like K3S and Rio and Rancher and Long. All these were going to come with us, because that's what's different. I mean, in a lot of ways, the old model of open source was, take open source innovation in the community and then package it up and try to sell a support for it or sell a commercial model of it. And what I think, the best companies are doing, companies like us, or like MongoDB or Elastic and stuff, they're building open source, right? They're building open source, new tools that are open source, where they they give away the product, they let anyone use it, they make it available to the universe, but they're the people creating it, and they're building from there a successful business where their depth of understanding of it is so high that that becomes the barrier to entry, right? The barrier to someone else competing. I mean, there's people who compete with Rancher using Rancher, right? If you go to China, there's a number of companies who sell Rancher and Rancher support in the market. Um, but at the end of the day, I think most people that feel like they would be beneficial, they would benefit from working directly with us. Like, we're just closer to their, we understand the product. They get to work with Darren. They get to work with our knowledgeable people. As long as we make them, make it a uh, fair offering, I think a lot of people will choose to want to work with the creators of these projects. So that's been the secret, and I'm excited to be at SUSE.
Yeah, talking about the innovation. So what next is there for the innovation at SUSE? For example, the acceleration of some of the products, because now I mean the team is big, and there are more people who understand open source, so there is more R&D that is going on in the product. So how much innovation we can expect? One of the things that I'm super interested to know is about the product K3 OS, which is like the operating system, and SUSE being the being in the operating system space. So how that will go? Will that be merging with the SUSE's another new offering, or will it be continued as it is? So what's your point on that?
Well, I can't really speak to where things are going for sure in the future. I think Darren probably would have given you better answers to that, because he's right in the middle of working on K3 OS and sort of where we want to take it. But without any question, we think there's a lot of interesting things that can be done with SUSE's incredible, depth of understanding of Linux. So, what's one of the things we've uncovered and been just sort of really, as we dug deeper into SUSE, I've been really blown away with, is how amazing SLES is and how amazingly configurable it is. Like, what we find is that more than we expected, SLES really allows you to. It's not just an operating system. It's almost like it gives you the ability to build an operating system or build the operating system you need, and it's just written in a really beautiful way that allows us to look at exactly what's needed for specific use cases. And the areas we're super interested in are in, not running on a server in a data center, but rather everywhere else. Like, what does it look like in embedded systems, real-time operating system environments, things like that? Because Rancher is getting pulled very quickly with K3S and RIA, or K3S and Fleet, into use cases that are what gives me just like super optimism for the future. Are use cases that are as far from the cloud as you can imagine, right? They're literally in mines, in factories, on oil rigs, in devices that are going to people's homes, in traffic lights, and in telco networks, and all these use cases. They're all getting containerized. They're all running on Kubernetes. They're all looking for scaled out, simple, easy to scale, and reliable management. Really good distributions, really clean tooling, and that's what Rancher's good at. So we're really bullish about all that. I think the OS underneath all of that is needs to fit the footprint, and that's where I think we have a really big opportunity. K3 OS, or its next, whatever K3 OS next looks like, it will be heavily influenced, obviously, by SUSE's depth of understanding, and then not just that, but all of the work SUSE does continuously on the kernel, and the ability to do this. So I couldn't be more bullish about that. But really, I mean, from an innovation perspective, I think that's just one stream. One of the exciting things is, we're seeing really interesting work developing in other areas too. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning Harvester, and I'm very excited about Harvester. To be honest with you, I think Harvester is very early, and it still needs to survive in the jungle and kind of prove that it can be viable and stable and all the rest. But when you bring together the power of Kubernetes and Longhorn, and the work on K3S, and management that we've been doing, all of a sudden you start to realize you can build amazing things on top of it. And the Harvester really is that. It's not about Kubernetes per se. In so many ways, it's about VMs and just simple converged infrastructure. But doing that with a by starting with cloud native building blocks, you end up with something pretty incredible because it's easy to deploy, easy to build, easy to run, super reliable, and incredibly disruptive. And so, Harvester is something that I'm very excited about, and I think we're gonna see, Rancher itself is also, I mean, Rancher 2.5, 2.6, the next couple releases of Rancher are really big releases with just big next step changes as Kubernetes management starts to mature and we start to envision, I mean, it's the classic thing. I was talking to a large enterprise this last week, and this company was saying, when we first started working with you guys, we probably thought that maybe 3 to 5% of our applications would be containerized. And now, a couple of years ago, I thought maybe 10% of our applications would be containerized. And now I think probably 90% of our applications will be containerized. And all of a sudden, your platform is going to be the most important platform in our company because it's going to be running all of our cloud. It's going to be running all of our data centers. And it's going to be running all of our edge. And that, that realization is setting into a lot of people. And many of those companies have taken a non-open source approach, I would say. I mean, whether they're running on OpenShift, which is open source, but really not open source in the same way that Rancher is, and kind of open driven, or they're running in, if they bought into Anthos or Tanzu or some of these other projects that are kind of trying to manage Kubernetes, every one of them, none of them are open, right? Like they all are these proprietary closed source management planes on top of open source technology. And it's funny, like the CIO is just like, I'm so glad we are building on open here, because if we had, if we'd gone with OpenShift, which we were thinking of, the idea, the cost, right? I would be writing $50 million checks. This is just, it's everything. I mean, like I would be basically paying a tax on every piece of compute that we touch. If we don't, if it'd be like if I doubled down and sort of committed to being locked in for the next 15 years, I feel like this is going to give us an enormous competitive advantage, being able to work with Rancher. And it will open up a lot of, save us a ton of money, but also give us a lot of flexibility. And that to me was the best thing I could hear from a customer, which is all of our goals with containers have been realized. We're hitting, they're showing all of the advantages we hoped they would. We're going to be expanding it massively. And our bet that betting on an open source project like Rancher was the right choice is also paying off. And so, because, and that is the really, in a lot of ways, people don't quite get that the real difference between even open source projects is whether the commercial version of those open source projects locks you in or not, because that's the challenge. So many things, one way or another, getting off is so hard that your leverage disappears once you choose the product, right? Once you choose to become a customer of VMware and you install it and you start to run on it and stuff, you're sort of done. Like it's there. It's not going away. You're going to be running that thing for a long time. It's very hard. You're talking about spending an enormous amount of energy to get out of something. And most companies don't have that energy, right? They have to put their energy towards their business needs, not towards getting off of something. So these bad decisions that people make where they buy and lock themselves into a platform, they have really long lasting repercussions. It's almost like it just grows inside as a cancer as the bill goes up. I mean, the number of people we talk to today that are trying to figure out how to get off of like Pivotal Cloud Foundry, right? PCF, where they invested in it and they're staring at just massive bills because it sounded all great, easier way to write apps, containerized application development, look how you can build these 12-factor apps, look how great they'll be. But the cost per application is just through the roof, and it's consuming all of their IT budget, right? They're writing $10 million, $12 million annual checks to VMware and Pivotal. And that, for applications that it may or may not be worth that, but are running on that, or certainly where they don't need to be doing that. And so there's just this problem in our industry, which is that every time something comes along, these large vendors, their basic goal is to lock you into the next version of their platforms that maybe incorporate those technologies, but that never give you as a company a chance to get off of them. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that from their perspective. It's proven to be very good business. These guys have grown very successful doing it. But I do think companies are realizing it. I think there's a slow realization that they have every same right to Kubernetes that we do, right? It's not like we have some special right to Kubernetes, or for that matter, even to Rancher, right? Like we gave up that right when we put an Apache tag on it and gave it out, and the license says they can use it in any way they want. That's the reality of the business, and so not everyone gets that, but it's really important.
Yeah, I want to touch on few points on which you talk. First is about the K3S and Fleet. So I just did a talk on Fleet a couple of days back, at one of the Docker meetups, virtual, obviously. So this Fleet is really interesting, and when you think of Kubernetes at scale or GitOps at scale, and you see where Fleet sits in, and you can manage the fleets of clusters, which we talk are thousands and thousands of clusters. So that actually is a very good use case that I think would be used at edge when we talk about K3S at edge plus fleet. So I think that's a pretty solid use case, and Trancher 2.5 ships with fleet. So again, that's a value add there as well. So it's a standalone project, so it's not part of only part of Rancher, so you can use it fleet as a standalone project as well. Next, again, the harvester, which I totally agree with Shannon that it is disruption that is happening in this space, in the HCI space, which is like it's yes, it is very early, at a very early stage, but we'll be doing a deep dive with Sheng on 8th of February with demos and how to do that. I'll have posted the link in the chat. So we'll be doing a deep dive, and Harvester basically helps you manage the VMs on top of Kubernetes using KubeVirt and the other stuff like Longhorn is there. So there are a lot of technologies which are there now. The base technologies are getting stable, and this is the time that people have started building on top of these base technologies, and which is adding extra value proposition, and which is solving additional problems that people thought wouldn't be solvable as an open source solution. So that's pretty interesting. Talking about the closed vendor and the open vendor, the openness of the product, I want to talk about a very, a very interesting thing. I want to ask about a very interesting thing to Shannon. And I think a lot of people who are actually in the open source business and who want to build business out of open source would be benefited from this particular portion. So, Shannon, there are folks and there are people who dedicate a lot of their time in building open source tools. Now there are a lot of talks, people are not able to make out money out of open source, but Rancher has been open source and it's completely open source because there is, you can use it, there is no hidden features that you will get when you only pay. So how Rancher, how you thought of building a complete business, a successful business, I would say, out of a truly open source product. What are the gotchas? What are the secret sauce ingredients that you want to recommend the other people who are out there and looking to start a business out of open source?
Yeah, this is one that not a lot of people really get into. Siam. So you're right. This is in a lot of ways the big innovation of Rancher. Like what makes us the most innovative is probably our business model and the approach we've taken. It's so different than how people have approached this in the past. And I think I don't know that open source is the right model for everyone or for most organizations or for most companies, right? If you're building if you're building some tools, there's nothing at all wrong with building a proprietary piece of software and selling it to people, right? That's absolutely a legitimate way to do business. And it's hard. It's getting harder though. It's getting harder because the open source community is so strong that almost any great idea is is if it doesn't begin in the open source universe, it quickly gets mimicked in the open source universe. And so you find that the open source universe is the place where most innovation is happening. And so when you want to build a company in the technology space and you want to build great tools, the hardest part is adoption, by far. If you think you've got a great idea, you have to find some way to show that to people. You have to get it out. You have to get people touching it. And open source is a meritocracy, right? The better projects tend to rise to the top. And word spreads, people become passionate about them, they start to promote them. And so what tends to win in the open source universe are good products that work, that are reliable, that are usable, and that they sort of fill an important need. And so if you can build something like that, you can start to develop a business, right? You can start to develop well, maybe not a business. You can start to develop a successful project that has people using it, and you can start to develop users. And I would say users are the underrepresented number inside of open source. Like, people don't really know how to track it. You rarely, even at Rancher, we struggle to know how many people use Rancher on our products. But at some level or another, it becomes obvious that people are actually using this project. The forums are full. Those Slack channels are stacked with people asking for questions. The issues are piling up. And, people focus a lot on contributors, and contributors are amazing, but users are the lifeblood, right? You can have a whole bunch of people contributing. If there's no one using the project, it really doesn't matter. It's the time. It's once people start to really consume the project that you start to have an opportunity, at least, to build a business. And the reality is that the key to building a business on open source is that open source technology you're building has to have a critical enough role in the organization to justify an organization saying that not only do they want to use it, but they want to make sure that they're close to the people who built it, because if it has any problems, the risk of those problems is high on their business. So it has to kind of equate to real value. It has to be that moment where it's like, well, we're running, like an example I gave earlier, we're running 80-90% of our applications on this platform. I'm more than happy to write a reasonable sized check to ensure that I've got the best people in the world supporting me on this. So this is the insurance version of the open source model. It really is based on, look, we're going to build you something really important. You're more than welcome to use it yourself. But if you want support and you want to have the company that knows it the best in the world helping you, you have to invest, right? You have to fund the development, call it. You have to invest in the project. And at Rancher, we kind of nailed that piece, right? We found a piece of technology that was clearly important enough. It was going to run lots of critical things. It fit in the right sort of sweet spot of market demand plus need for support that justified people investing in it. And there's just a lot of places that I think that happens. Databases have been an obvious one, where a lot of open source databases have generated very big business, all the way back to MySQL. They did a great job with this. But where a lot of people struggle is a lot of open source engineering and development ends up not being on something that you can actually monetize, right? So a lot of work, I mean, really, if you think about it, this is the biggest challenge Docker faced, right? Docker itself is, the most important piece of technology that powered this whole move, right? That whether it's us or Kubernetes XXS or so many things. And yet that Docker piece of technology really was kind of already supported by the operating system, right? And so if I was a company and I had an OS contract with Red Hat or SUSE, they were including Docker support in that, like they were supporting containers in that. So I already had a relationship with someone who was going to support that piece of technology. So it was very hard for Docker to come and say, hey, you're running on Docker. Don't you want to purchase Docker support from us? And so they had to find other ways to try and build monetization, whether that was moving up the stack or moving into things like Docker Hub and other pieces of technology around it. And that's the magic, right? It's the finding the sweet spot. If you're going to go with our route and build a really open company, you have to kind of have great product that appeals, and you have to have a market fit that it kind of equates to people buying. And then the big piece at the end is you have to really deliver on the promises you're making, because the lock-in doesn't exist. So every year we have to renew our customers, right? Someone buys in, they're sort of basically committing to a year or maybe a couple year commitment to work with us. And so that basically is only like a ticket to dance, right? We get in, now we actually have to show that the value we generate is real. And so, like, we say it all the time, but our NPS is like the most critical thing. Is like, for the people who use Rancher and then pay us for support, do they get value from that? Because if not, if the product, if for example the support is awful, they call in, they're having a problem, and we, I don't know, try the forums, we're not gonna get a lot of renewals. And so we're obsessive about being their best vendor, being that vendor that they're just like, oh my gosh, you have no idea. These guys, they're, when we want to, we can file a support ticket, we can contact them on Slack, I can call their cell phone. Like, this is the support I always dreamed of. Somebody who really doesn't draw strong lines around their product and point me to someone else when there's a problem, but deep dives, gives us root cause analysis, makes preemptive recommendations. So we don't have, like, we have to blow their mind so that it would be insane for them to stop being part of our ecosystem and being a customer. So we have both so I would say we have a much tougher business model, right? We have to be able to differentiate ourselves from our own product, which is hard, right? And we have to be able to then keep them. But it's like anything. It's sort of like running. It's like training for a marathon, right? By having such a hard business, but you have to prove to people that you should spend money on this, and then prove that they actually got value out of it. We develop into a really, really strong company because we have the best support engineers, and we have obsessive focus on customer success. I mean, just obsessive. And we renew 90+% of our customers every year. They love what they get out of this. They see it as a huge, in fact, they come to us saying, we want you guys to do more of our ecosystem. We want to talk to you about converged infrastructure, HCI. We want to talk to you about databases and storage. And like, we need more vendors like you. You're the vendor who gives us all the stuff that makes us more efficient, allows us to move faster, and is a real partner in delivering this service. And so that's the future, right? Is better relationships between the company and the customer, more room to innovate. And then we have to keep moving because we're like a shark. If we stop swimming, we're not going to go anywhere, right? Our growth will plateau and start to fail. So we are in this amazing journey, and I'm loving every day of it, Sam. I do think we're out of time, aren't we?
No, that is fine. So I think this was really important piece to discuss, because a lot of people think, and a lot of time it has sparked the conversation on Twitter or other social media, like, okay, people are building open source and people are not able to make anything out of open source. So I wanted to understand your analogy from a very successful standpoint that Rancher is today, after even acquired by SUSE, and they are still in a strong position. So the mindset was very important. The actual value proposition, the innovation angle, and yes, the support. And when you say support, it should be the way we say, like, it is the actual support. I mean, when you say it's support, then you do the exact thing what is asked for, the customer oriented support. And so that are the main ingredients. So I hope that people who do watch this, or who are watching, or who will watch this later, do see this part of the stream, where you have discussed a lot of things that has been right for Rancher, and that could be right if you have the correct direction, and you think of all these things, whether this particular product is really adding value to something out there in the industry. So I think that would be really helpful for all the folks who are trying to build business out of open source.
Well, anything we can do to help too. I'm always happy to chat with people. Nothing makes me happier than when I get a LinkedIn message from an entrepreneur who's trying to build a company on open source and looks for advice and guidance. So I've built two now and have had incredible success with both of them. So it's I really believe in this. It's proven. I can show you. I can tell you this really works, but it's it only works for the right combination of technology and urgency, and if you execute it well. It is a very tough, narrow path to success in this space. Not by any means an easy way to build a business.
Yeah. So we are about time, and we have discussed plenty of things. The last thing that I want to show you is, I just wrote a book recently, a couple of days back, so which is Learn CK Scenarios. It's a collection of questions and Q&A practice with detailed solutions. It's 52 pages of book, and you get. I mean, there are two versions of it. One is only the book. Other one is with the video solutions that I'm preparing right now, and which will be available in 2 weeks. So you can check that out. I'll paste the link in the chat, and there's a discount coupon, first 100, 50% discount coupon for first 100 folks. So the coupon itself is first 100. So have a look at it if you want to do CKS certification, which is Certified Kubernetes Specialty on Security. So it's a security certification which launched last KubeCon. So have that, and yes, subscribe to the channel for more streams. There are upcoming streams on Harvester and Graal VM. Graal VM one I'm about to create, which will be on 15th of February, which is also amazing technology. There will be a lot of demos and deep dive on the technology. So thank you, Shannon, for joining us today, and telling the community about Rancher and the innovation that is in progress at SUSE, and how to build successful business out of open source. These are really very insightful information that I think people would really want to hear more and more. But I think we have covered a lot of the base parts of it, and then from there people can start their own journeys. So yeah, any last minute words you want to say?
No, just thanks so much. It's amazing to see all the growth in your career since we first met back in Bangalore all those years ago. So congratulations to you as well. I love chatting with you. I love talking to you on Twitter and LinkedIn and Slack. So keep up the great work. It's great to see all this ecosystem create so many successful careers.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon, for that. So you stay for a minute. I'll just end the broadcast.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining. Have a nice day. See you in the next stream. Bye bye.